Welcome to the Crime Bull podcast, where it's true crime, no bull. Thank you for listening. Please support us, like, and subscribe. Okay, let's solve some crime. Today we're diving deep into a case that's been puzzling investigators for nearly 50 years. The Benton County Jane Doe. We've got a stack of articles, forensic reports, and even some local news coverage from back in the day, and let me tell you, this one's a real head-scratcher.
It's the kind of case that grabs you from the start.
Oh, yeah.
A woman found in a cardboard box abandoned in the middle of a cornfield back in 1976, shot in the head with no identification, and decades later, her identity remains a complete mystery.
Right. It's like something straight out of a crime novel, but with real-life consequences. So for our listener, let's set the scene. What do we know about the initial discovery?
Picture this, October 8th, 1976, a crisp autumn day in rural Indiana. A farmer's out working his fields when he stumbles upon a large cardboard box, the kind used to ship refrigerators. Just sitting there in the middle of his cornfield. It's sealed with gray tape and a clothesline, and inside he finds the body of a woman fully clothed with a single gunshot wound to the head.
I'm already getting chills just thinking about it. I mean, finding a body is one thing, but finding it like that in a box in a cornfield, that's a whole other level of unsettling.
It definitely suggests a deliberate attempt to conceal the body and likely her identity. The question is, why go through all that trouble to make it look like she just appeared out of thin air?
That's what I find so fascinating about cold cases like this. It's like trying to solve a giant puzzle where half the pieces are missing. So let's talk about the pieces we do have. What can you tell us about the victim herself? What did they manage to piece together from what little they had?
Based on her physical characteristics, investigators estimated her age to be somewhere between 55 and 65. She was about 5'2", weighed around 160 pounds, and had sandy hair with streaks of gray. One of the most distinctive features was a large surgical scar indicating she'd had a right-side radical mastectomy.
It's almost unbelievable that with a detail as specific as a mastectomy scar, no one came forward to identify her. You'd think that would narrow things down, wouldn't it?
You would think so, but it seems like this woman was deliberately erased. Her clothes didn't offer much help either. She was wearing a two-tone green button-down jacket and matching slacks, a fairly common style for the time.
Okay, let's talk about that cardboard box for a second.
Yeah.
Seems like a pretty key piece of evidence in all of this. Did investigators manage to learn anything from it?
They did. The box itself was traced back to a manufacturer in Illinois, and these types of boxes were distributed throughout the Midwest. This meant she could have been from anywhere in the region, which significantly broadened the scope of the investigation.
So not only was her identity a mystery, but her geographic origin was too. That's a lot of unknowns for investigators to grapple with. Was there anything else found inside the box besides the body?
There was one other intriguing detail: a broken perfume vial. Now, we don't know if it belonged to the victim or if it was placed there for some other reason.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Was it a deliberate red herring? An attempt to mislead investigators? Or was it something she treasured a trace of her life before she ended up in that box? Do investigators put a lot of stock in seemingly insignificant details like that?
Absolutely. In a case like this where you're dealing with so little information, every detail, no matter how seemingly small, could be a potential clue. Investigators would analyze the perfume vial, trying to determine its brand origin and, if possible, any fingerprints or other trace evidence that could connect it to someone. They'd also try to determine if it was a common fragrance at the time or something more unique that might help identify the victim or provide insights into her lifestyle.
It's amazing how meticulous investigators have to be, especially in a case where every piece of the puzzle is so crucial. Now, another thing that always gets me in cases like this is the location. How does a large box containing a body end up in the middle of a remote cornfield without a trace?
That's a question that has puzzled investigators from the beginning. There were no tire tracks or footprints leading to the box, despite the fact that it had rained the night before, which would have made the ground soft. This absence of evidence led to one of the most intriguing and perhaps outlandish theories in this case, the helicopter theory.
Wait, a helicopter? Are we talking about some kind of dramatic Hollywood-style body drop?
Yeah.
Why a helicopter?
Well, several witnesses reported seeing a white and gold helicopter in the area around the time the body was likely dumped. What's particularly interesting is that the type of helicopter cited in 1976 Jet Ranger Bell was incredibly expensive for the time.
So if this theory holds any water, we're not just talking about any random killer. We're talking about someone with considerable resources, someone who could afford to rent or even own a helicopter. That adds a whole other dimension to this mystery.
It does. The theory posits that they flew the box in and dropped it from the helicopter, explaining the lack of tracks at the scene. It was definitely a theory that captured the public's imagination, but there's a twist.
Oh, I love a good twist. Lay it on me. What happened with the helicopter theory?
The current coroner has actually dismissed the helicopter theory, deeming it highly unlikely. He believes there are other, more plausible explanations for how the body was transported to the field without leaving obvious traces.
Okay, that's interesting. So if not by helicopter, then how did he offer any alternative theories? What are we left with if the most dramatic explanation is off the table?
He hasn't definitively stated how he believes it happened, but has suggested the killer or killers may have utilized methods that wouldn't have left obvious signs in the terrain, especially given the time that has passed and the natural weathering of the scene. It challenges us to think more practically about how someone could have transported a body without attracting attention.
You're right, it really makes you rethink the logistics of it all.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they used a smaller vehicle that could navigate the terrain without leaving noticeable tracks. Or perhaps they transported the box in pieces and assembled it at the scene. It seems almost counterintuitive that such a seemingly clumsy method could be the most effective way to conceal a crime.
Exactly. Sometimes the simplest explanations are the ones we overlook because we're drawn to the more sensational possibilities. It's a good reminder that even in a case as baffling as this, we need to consider all angles no matter how mundane they might seem.
It's all about connecting the dots, right? Even if some of those dots seem pretty faint. Now let's dive into the theories surrounding her death. Over the years, there have been a lot of speculations about what happened to Benton County Jane Doe. What are some of the leading theories, and which ones do you find most compelling, given the evidence?
With a case this cold and with so little to go on, a lot of it is conjecture. But that's also what makes it so intriguing. One possibility is that this was a crime of passion, a personal dispute that escalated, leading to a tragic and impulsive act.
A crime of passion.
Hmm.
That makes sense. Especially given the effort to conceal the body, it suggests someone trying to protect themselves, perhaps even someone who knew the victim.
Right. Another theory posits that she was involved with something or someone dangerous, possibly linked to organized crime. This would explain the level of secrecy and the lengths they went to hide her identity.
Organized crime. Now, for our listener who may not be familiar with the term, can you explain a little bit about what organized crime actually entails?
Certainly, when we talk about organized crime, we're referring to criminal activities carried out by structured groups, often with a hierarchy and a code of conduct. They engage in a range of illegal activities, from gambling and drug trafficking to extortion and even murder.
So if Benton County Jane Doe was connected to organized crime, it's possible she knew too much, or maybe she was trying to get out and they silenced her to protect their operations.
Exactly. Her death could have been a way to send a message, a brutal reminder of the consequences of crossing them.
It's chilling to think about,
Yeah.
but it's also important to remember that these are just theories. We can't definitively say that she was involved in anything illegal.
Of course. It's crucial to consider all possibilities without jumping to conclusions. There are other theories that focus on more personal motives, such as domestic violence.
So she could have been in an abusive relationship, and her partner, fearing the consequences of their actions, chose to dispose of her body in this way.
Precisely. And then there's the theory that her death was related to her mastectomy. Could there have been a medical error during her surgery, a cover-up gone wrong?
That's an interesting angle. It would certainly explain the desperation to conceal her identity. It's almost as if they were trying to erase any trace of her existence. Do you think it's possible they panicked and made a series of bad decisions that ultimately led to her being found?
It's definitely within the realm of possibility. When people panic, they don't always think clearly, and they might make mistakes that ultimately lead to their downfall.
It's like that saying, no one plans to fail, they just fail to plan. What about the possibility of a random encounter, a chance meeting with someone with sinister intentions? Could she have been the victim of a stranger?
We can't rule out that possibility. It's a sad reality that sometimes people are in the wrong place at the wrong time, becoming victims of circumstance.
That's heartbreaking to consider, but it's a reminder that these cases are about real people, real lives lost. It's easy to get caught up in the mystery and the speculation, but we have to remember the human cost of these crimes.
I completely agree. Every unsolved case represents a life cut short, a family left with unanswered questions, a void that can never be filled.
We've talked a lot about the different theories surrounding her death, but I'd like to shift gears a bit and focus on the investigation itself. This case has been cold for decades, but clearly there's still an active effort to solve it. What are some of the challenges investigators face when dealing with a case this old, and what are some of the methods they've used to try to uncover the truth?
Time is the biggest enemy in any cold case. Witnesses may have passed away or moved, memories fade, and evidence can deteriorate or become lost. But advancements in forensic science, particularly in DNA analysis and genetic genealogy, have given investigators new tools to revisit these cold cases with fresh eyes.
I've heard so much about genetic genealogy and how it's revolutionized cold case investigations. Can you break down how this technology works and how it's been applied to the Benton County Jane Doe case?
Certainly, genetic genealogy involves comparing DNA profiles to those in public genealogy databases. These databases contain genetic information from individuals who have voluntarily submitted their DNA for ancestry research. By searching these databases for potential relatives of an unknown person like Benton County Jane Doe, investigators can start building a family tree.
So it's like a digital detective tracing family lines through strands of DNA. That's incredible.
It really is. In 2019, investigators decided to use genetic genealogy in this case. They exhumed Jane Doe's body, extracted a DNA sample, and submitted it to these databases. They then enlisted the help of skilled forensic genealogists to analyze the results and begin piecing together her family history.
That must be painstaking work, combing through all those genetic matches and trying to find connections that might lead back to her identity.
It is. It's like assembling a giant jigsaw puzzle where you don't have the picture on the box for reference, but with each new match, the picture becomes clearer and they get closer to uncovering who she was and where she came from.
Has there been any progress on that front? Have they been able to identify her through genetic genealogy?
As of right now, her identity still remains a mystery. But the use of genetic genealogy has injected new life into the investigation.
So there's still hope.
Absolutely. Every new advancement in technology brings us closer to solving these mysteries. And the fact that investigators are still actively working on this case nearly 50 years later is a testament to their dedication and their belief that even the coldest of cases can be cracked.
It's a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, hope persists. And that even when answers seem elusive, the pursuit of truth and justice should never be abandoned.
Well said. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, our unwavering desire to make sense of the world around us, and our refusal to let the victims of these crimes be forgotten.
Speaking of remembering the victims, I think it's important to acknowledge the impact this case has had on the Benton County community. Yeah. How has this unsolved mystery shaped their lives and their perception of their own town?
Imagine living in a small, tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone else. Then suddenly, this horrific crime happens right in your backyard, and the victim remains unidentified for decades. It shatters the illusion of safety, that feeling of being insulated from the darkness that exists in the world.
It's like a crack in the foundation of their reality, a constant reminder that evil can lurk anywhere, even in the most seemingly peaceful places.
Exactly. And when the perpetrator remains at large, it creates a sense of unease, a feeling that someone capable of such violence could still be among them.
I imagine it also created a lot of speculation and rumors within the community. Did the case lead to any significant changes in Benton County, like increased security measures or a heightened sense of vigilance among residents?
Absolutely. The case undoubtedly had a profound impact on the community's psyche. People became more cautious, more aware of their surroundings. Parents might have been more protective of their children. Neighbors more observant of anything out of the ordinary.
It's almost as if the innocence of the town was lost, replaced by a sense of vulnerability and a recognition that even in a close-knit community, you can't always know who to trust.
You hit the nail on the head. It's a stark reminder that even in the places we consider safe and familiar, darkness can lurk in the shadows.
We've talked a lot about the darkness surrounding this case, but I also think it's important to highlight the hope. The fact that investigators are still actively working on it, that new technologies like genetic genealogy are being applied, and that the community hasn't forgotten Benton County Jane Doe, those are all signs that even in the darkest of times, the pursuit of truth and justice continues.
You're absolutely right. This case is a testament to the enduring power of hope and the unwavering belief that even after nearly 50 years, answers can still be found.
It's also a reminder that every victim deserves a voice, every life lost deserves to be remembered, and every mystery deserves to be solved. What are your thoughts on the role of the media in keeping cases like this in the public eye?
The media plays a crucial role in raising awareness about cold cases. Think back to 1976 when Benton County Jane Doe was discovered. Local newspapers would have covered the story extensively, and it likely made its way to regional and maybe even national news outlets. But the media landscape has changed drastically since then.
Oh, for sure. We've gone from print media and evening news broadcasts to a world of 247 news cycles, social media, and true crime podcasts like ours.
Exactly. This evolution has both advantages and drawbacks. On one hand, it's easier than ever to disseminate information about cold cases, reach a wider audience, and generate renewed interest in cases that might have otherwise faded from memory. But on the other hand, we're bombarded with so much information these days that it can be challenging to filter out the noise and focus on the cases that truly need our attention.
You're right. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack,
Mm-hmm.
but the haystack is constantly growing, and sometimes it feels like we're drowning in information. How do we ensure that cases like Benton County Jane Doe don't get lost in the shuffle?
I think that's where responsible storytelling comes in. It's about approaching these cases with sensitivity, integrity, and a focus on the victims and their families.
It's about honoring their stories, right? And
Yeah.
using our platforms to advocate for justice. I also think it's important to be mindful of the potential for misinformation, especially in the age of social media.
Absolutely. With the speed at which information travels online, it's easier than ever for rumors and speculation to spread, potentially hindering investigations and causing further pain for the families involved.
So what can our listener do to ensure they're consuming and sharing information responsibly?
It's all about being a critical consumer of information. Always verify sources, cross-reference information, and be wary of sensationalized or unverified claims. When in doubt, err on the side of caution. It's better to be silent than to contribute to the spread of misinformation.
That's great advice. It's about being mindful of the power of our words and the impact they can have on others. Now, you mentioned earlier that the current coroner has cast doubt on the helicopter theory. What are some of the other explanations for how the box ended up in such a remote location without a trace?
That's where things get interesting. The coroner hasn't definitively stated how he believes it happened, but he suggested that the killer or killers might have utilized methods that were less flashy but more effective at avoiding detection.
So we're back to the idea of simple explanations being overlooked because we're drawn to the more dramatic possibilities. Can you give us an example of what those less flashy methods might entail?
Imagine instead of a helicopter, a simple pickup truck, or even an ATV. These vehicles could easily navigate the terrain without leaving noticeable tracks, especially if they stuck to existing dirt roads or trails. Or perhaps they transported the box in pieces, assembling it at the scene to avoid attracting attention during transport.
That makes sense. It's about blending in, not standing out. So if we move away from the helicopter theory, we're left with a very different image of the perpetrator.
Precisely. Instead of a wealthy, high-profile individual with access to a helicopter, we might be looking at someone more familiar with the area, someone who knows the back roads and how to move around undetected.
Someone who understands the lay of the land, who can blend into the rural landscape and disappear without a trace. It paints a whole new picture, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It shifts the focus from a glamorous Hollywood-style crime to a more grounded, gritty reality.
It's a reminder that sometimes the truth is hidden in plain sight, disguised by our own assumptions and our tendency to gravitate towards the more sensational explanations. As we delve deeper into this case, it's crucial to keep an open mind, consider all possibilities, and be willing to let go of the theories that no longer fit the emerging narrative.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's all about being open to new information, challenging our preconceived notions, and being willing to adjust our understanding as the case unfolds.
Speaking of new information, I'm curious to know more about the efforts to identify Benton County Jane Doe. We talked about genetic genealogy, but are there other methods being used to try to uncover her identity?
Absolutely. While genetic genealogy has taken center stage in recent years, it's not the only tool in the investigators' arsenal. They're also leveraging facial reconstruction technology, which uses skeletal features to create a likeness of the victim's face. This can be incredibly helpful in jogging people's memories or providing a visual reference for potential matches.
That's fascinating. I've seen those facial reconstructions on true crime shows, and it's amazing how lifelike they can be. Is there a facial reconstruction available for Benton County Jane Doe?
There is. It was created by a skilled forensic artist several years ago and has been widely circulated in hopes that someone might recognize her.
For our listener, we'll make sure to include a link to that facial reconstruction in the show notes so you can see it for yourself. It's incredible how technology is helping to breathe life back into these cold cases, giving a face to the nameless and a voice to the silenced.
It really is remarkable. And it's not just technology that's driving these investigations forward, it's also the dedication of the investigators, the forensic experts, and the community members who refuse to let these cases be forgotten.
It's a testament to the enduring power of human connection and the unwavering belief that every life has value. Every story deserves to be told, and every mystery deserves to be solved.
It's a reminder that we're all connected, that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, there's a shared human experience that binds us together. And it's that connection, that empathy, that fuels our desire to seek justice for the victims and their families.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. And I have to say the Benton County Jane Doe case is one of the most intriguing and heartbreaking cases I've ever come across.
Uh,
What are some of the key takeaways you hope our listener walks away with?
I hope they come away with a deeper understanding of the complexities of cold case investigations, the challenges investigators face, and the unwavering dedication they bring to these cases. I also hope it sparks a sense of curiosity and a desire to learn more about unsolved mysteries both locally and nationally.
It's about remembering the victims, honoring their stories, and advocating for justice, even when it seems impossible. It's also about recognizing the role we all play in keeping these cases alive, whether it's sharing information responsibly, supporting law enforcement efforts, or simply remembering the names and faces of those who have been lost.
Well said. It's about keeping the hope alive, believing that even in the darkest of times, the truth has a way of emerging.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the possibility of misinformation hindering investigations. Can you talk a bit more about the types of misinformation that often circulate in cases like this and how they can impact the search for the truth?
You're right, misinformation can be a real obstacle in cold cases. It can range from well-intentioned but misguided theories to outright hoaxes and fabrications. Sometimes it's fueled by a genuine desire to help, but it can often lead to dead ends and wasted resources for investigators.
Can you give us some specific examples of the types of misinformation that have been problematic in cold cases?
Certainly, false confessions are a classic example. Sometimes individuals seeking attention or notoriety confess to crimes they didn't commit, leading investigators down the wrong path. Then there's the spread of rumors and speculation on social media, which can quickly spiral out of control and create a distorted view of the case. And of course, there's the deliberate planting of false information, sometimes by individuals connected to the crime, in an attempt to mislead investigators and deflect suspicion.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where someone keeps swapping out the pieces. It's frustrating, and it can be incredibly damaging to the investigation.
Exactly. Misinformation creates noise, and in a cold case where every piece of information is crucial, that noise can drown out the truth.
So how can our listener help combat misinformation and ensure they're not contributing to the problem? What are some red flags to watch out for when consuming information about true crime cases?
That's a great question. First and foremost, always be skeptical of sources that haven't been verified or corroborated by reputable news outlets or law enforcement agencies. Be wary of information that relies heavily on anonymous sources or unnamed insiders.
So if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly. And always be mindful of the potential biases of the source. Are they presenting a balanced view of the case, or are they pushing a particular agenda?
It's all about critical thinking, right? Taking the time to evaluate the information before we accept it as truth.
Precisely. And remember, when in doubt, don't share. It's better to err on the side of caution than to contribute to the spread of information that could potentially harm the investigation or the families involved.
I think that's a great place to leave it for today. This case has been a real eye-opener, and it's a reminder that even in the most baffling mysteries, there are always lessons to be learned and stories to be told.
I agree. And while the Benton County Jane Doe's identity remains unknown, I have a feeling her story is far from over. With the continued dedication of investigators and the advancements in forensic science, there's always hope that one day her name will be spoken, her story will be fully told, and she will finally receive the justice she deserves.
We'll be keeping a close eye on this case and any developments that come to light. For our listener, we encourage you to dive deeper into this case. We'll be posting links to articles, resources, and that facial reconstruction we mentioned earlier in the show notes. If you have any information that you think might be relevant to this case, please don't hesitate to contact the Benton County Sheriff's Department. Even the smallest detail could be the missing piece that finally breaks this case wide open.
True crime, no bull.